Hi, my name is Minhal Beg, and I am the director of We Grow Now. We Grow Now follows the lives of two boys and best friends growing up in the public housing projects of Chicago in 1992. Well, I started working on it in 2018. At the time, I was processing a personal loss. My father had passed, and my family was trying to figure out what to do with the family home. And so I was really interested in this theme of like, what is home and what does it represent for people? How do we define it? And I wanted to do it in a very different perspective. I had grown up in Chicago, and Cabrini Green was always a place I'd heard of. I'd never been there, but it felt like this is an inextricable part of the city, but it's a world away. And then by the time I graduated college, the last of the towers was demolished. So when I came back to the city, it was like totally different. And the city was different and I was different. And I was really interested in exploring this theme of home through the eyes of people who still had a community, but the physical place where they had resided was no longer there. And so the process of interviewing people started in 2018 and then continued for several years, where I met with former residents and they spoke to their experiences of living in the high rises and what life was like. And their stories shaped what the eventual film ended up being, which focuses on the perspective of growing up in a high rise from it's a child's point of view. So a lot of the residents I spoke to had grown up in Cabrini Green, and many of them ended up being they were children around the time when Dantrell was shot and killed. And so the story sort of zeroed in on that year, 1992, because when that year was so pivotal for the community and for the people who lived there. There were people who I'd interviewed who grew up there in the 70s, all the way up until when the towers were demolished. So I got a full range of interviews, but I focused in on that year because it was such a turning point in the history of the neighborhood. The perspective of children emerged from the interviews because people had really amazing stories about jumping and playing hooky from school and all of the everyday life stuff that was so fascinating and not what I was expecting going into talking to people about their lives in the high rises. And so I really wanted to depict the high rises in their point of view because it had to be a place that we loved the way that they loved it. And so that was why the story is from through their eyes, because it really is just so different from being an adult and sort of understanding more about the neighborhood and all the dangers and all these external forces. When you're a kid, all of that stuff is still there and you're not naive to it, but I think there's a greater appreciation for all the little joys and all the little wonders and the fact that all of your friends all live in the same building. The casting process took about a year and a half in total. Finding Malik was the hardest challenge because he's such a specific kid. When I spoke to the casting director, Aisha Kohli, we spoke about how we wanted to have kids like the kids in Crooklyn, which was a great inspiration for this movie. And she had cast Crooklyn, so she understood how to find a child that has like a specific spirit. We really wanted someone who had the emotional maturity to carry the movie, and so that's when we got Blake's tape, it was just so evident that it was him. He was exactly how I pictured. And then Gian came in later. We had seen him earlier in the process and he was just too young. But then a year had gone by and he'd grown up. And then he finally felt right for the part of Eric. And then Journey came on board later on in the process because the script really resonated with her as she's a mother herself. And then every single person who joined the project, it was just kind of a true miracle that they came on board and were so willing to like share a scene with child actors and like be so generous with themselves. So this is the second film I've shot in Chicago, and it's amazing every time I go back. The crews all know me. So many of the people who worked on the last film worked on this film, and Chicago's just always had a special place in my heart. It was the first place my father immigrated to after, he left Pakistan, and so it was always going to be this setting in the back, for my films. But telling this specific story was a really different endeavor than the last film because it's a community and a neighborhood that I was not a part of growing up. And so I approached it really differently, using a very journalistic process and really going there to be responsive to the stories instead of trying to impose the story of what I thought should happen or what I felt like was best for the movie dramatically. Obviously, there's fictionalized elements, but we really tried to get as much of the plot details and sort of character details from actual residents who live there. Oh, there were so many highlights. I guess the two of my favorite sequences to film and that I didn't think would be totally possible. We filmed inside of the Art Institute, so we got to shut down the Art Institute for several hours and we filmed inside there, and everybody was so excited, and the kids were just thrilled that they got to shut down a museum. They were like, this is our place right now. We can go anywhere. And that was awesome. So it was a really special place because it was a place I went to as a kid all the time with my father, and I just needed it to be in the movie as a place that they retreated to. And then the second sequence was really fun was on the train. It was a real moving train, and so the kids were just that was day one of filming, and so it was logistically really challenging to have moving trains and children jumping onto the subway cars, but that was really fun for them. With the interviews, the people I was talking to were reflecting back on what it was like, so that's a little bit different than a child telling you what their day was like. But I really leaned on the actors. When the kids were rehearsing with me, listened to what felt strange and what could be sometimes they would say something in their own way, and then it ended up being I would just change it to what was most comfortable for them to say. And then once they were cast, their personalities informed the characters too. And so it got easier once we cast them, and I just had a lot of Zoom rehearsals and in-person rehearsals to start making changes to the script.